In outer and expanding circle countries, English is either a second language or, in case of multilingual speakers, it is one of the languages in the linguistic repertoire of the speakers. This results in English being constantly in contact with other languages. Because of this constant contact of English with other languages, the varieties of English in these areas, in the outer and expanding circle countries, are influenced by the local languages in different areas of grammar and use, which include lexicon, phonology, and discourse. In this unit, we are going to look at the phonological variations that the nativized varieties of English exhibit. When we talk about phonology, which is the study of speech sounds of a language, we often talk about people having an accent. Now, what do we mean by an accent? An accent is simply the way you sound when you speak. The accent that you display or you use is a result of different factors. For example, how you learned the language, whether it was through classroom instruction, whether you acquired it in a native environment, or whether it was through television, films, radio, etc. And also where you learned it. Did you learn it in a foreign environment, which means in your own country where English is a non-native language, or whether you learned it in a native country? And also when you learned it, for example, in terms of age, whether you learned it as a child, whether you learned it as an adult, so on and so forth. So we can say that accent is determined by where a person lives, for example, in a native country or a non-native country, and also not only in terms of speaking broadly, in terms of countries, etc. Also, what social groups a person belongs to, whether somebody belongs to an upper class, a lower class in terms of socioeconomic levels. So all these factors are behind the accent that people display when they speak. So people who live in close contact with each other, they normally show the same kind of accent. And their accent is different from other people. For example, people who belong to, let's say, the upper social class in Pakistan, they will use a certain kind of accent, not only when they speak English, but also when they speak Urdu. So people who live in close contact with each other share the way they speak, which is accent, and which is different from the way other groups, other social groups speak, or the accent of the other social groups. The differences we see in the accent that people use are caused by stress and rhythm and segmental features. Stress assignment in nativized varieties is very different from the non-native varieties of English. What I'm trying to say here is the stress assignment in the variety of English which is used by inner circle countries is quite different from the stress assignment in the nativized varieties of English, that is, the Englishes which are used in outer and expanding circle countries. It is quite distinct. This stress assignment on words in nativized varieties of English, that is, English is used in expanding and outer circle countries, is quite distinctive, and it may appear very peculiar to native speakers. And sometimes native speakers have difficulty understanding non-native speakers only because of the stress assignment on words. Let's take a look at some examples. Non-native English speakers from outer and expanding circles, will pronounce the word success instead of success. So in success, the stress is on the second syllable, whereas the outer circle, people from outer circle countries would put the stress at the beginning of the word. So they would say success, whereas the correct pronunciation would be success. Similarly, they would say recognize for recognize, recognize for recognize. So in this case, the stress, the outer circle speakers of English put the stress on the second syllable, whereas the stress should be on the first syllable, recognize. The same is true for the word photography. The outer circle speakers of English would pronounce this word as photography, putting the stress on the last syllable, whereas the correct pronunciation is photography. The stress is on the second syllable, photography. But the outer circle speakers of English would pronounce it as photography. Why do we have these differences in the stress assignment of speakers from outer circle countries? It is because English is a stress-timed language, whereas many of the languages of the outer circle, including Urdu and Hindi, are syllable time languages. Now, what do we mean by syllable time languages? It means the stress assignment is based on the values attached to the morae of the syllable. Morae is a technical term we use in phonology, which means the weight of syllabus in terms of duration, which means how long the syllable is, right? So in syllable timed languages, the stress is determined by the length of the syllable, or what they call the weight of the syllable in terms of duration, how long it will take you to pronounce that syllable. So, and the primary stress in syllable time languages goes with the heavier, the weightier syllable, which means the longer syllable. The syllable which has more letters, let's say more sounds. English, on the other hand, is a stress-timed language, which means stresses occur at regular intervals, irrespective of the length of the word or the syllable. The stresses will occur at regular intervals, with the result that all the unstressed sounds are squeezed between two intervals of the stress. And all these unstressed words are accommodated within two intervals of stresses. This is the main reason why we have variations in the accent of the non-native speakers, the speakers who come from outer circle countries and speak a nativized variety of English.